Hey, it's Mazzy, and let's talk about Byrds parts. Out of the three groups that I love the most, the Beatles, the Kinks, and the Byrds are the one probably with the greatest solid output of solo work of any of them. As much as I love the Beatles solo stuff, uh, there's some great stuff obviously came out from George, John, Paul, and Ringo, but a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of things that aren't as high quality. Now, some of you may argue with that, but and same with the Kinks, obviously. Ray Davis didn't put out any kind of solo record too many years after the Kinks split up, which is kind of wonder why that never happened. Dave did, but the Byrds have an illustrious pre and post band career of the solo artists. So what I want to showcase here are just my collection. It's not a definitive overview of Byrds solo work, but a lot of you who are into the Byrds will know these records for the most part, and you could dive well into the well and to discover more things. And there are obviously some specific major omissions maybe I don't have, but let me just start showing these two CDs that came out some years ago. There were vinyl variations of these called Byrds Parts. And what these CDs compile are a lot of solo work from the members of the Byrds, the original members, the first five of Roger McGuinn. Jim McGuinn became Roger McGuinn, David Crosby, Gene Clark, Michael Clark, and Chris Hillman. And then over the years, there were a number of various hybrids with Jim McGuinn, Roger McGuinn being the only constant on the second half. And we all know the people that have jumped in and out throughout the years, and I'll share some of those solo records. Now, so it's the Byrds begat Crosby, Stills, Nash, begat Souther, Hillman, Furay, begat, and on and on. You could go crazy with all these combinations of Byrds. So I'm going to put links below to my previous Byrds related videos. I did my Byrds collection, Byrds and related collection. I did a Byrds ranking of the actual main albums of the group, the Byrds, and I did a Gene Clark overview as well. One of my favorites, but anyway, check those out. There are links below. Now, there was a comment on one of my Byrds videos. It must have been the rankings video, as I recall, and you can seek that little string out back and forth. Someone commented how basically after the first two or three albums, the Byrds don't count. And just because Jim McGuinn is in the Byrds, those don't matter. I would argue otherwise. Different band, yes. Probably a tighter band as a live band with Clarence White and Skip Batton and Gene Parsons, but we'll get into that a little bit. You could argue the same thing, and my argument was, take Fleetwood Mac. They were a blues band. They had, three major incarnations with a few overlaps. The pop band with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks is nothing like the original band, but they're a valid band. They are Fleetwood Mac, because the only constant in their term, in their history, was the rhythm section of John McVie and Mick Fleetwood. This is my take on it. Obviously, people have different views on it, but I will stand by that every Byrds album is really interesting, even when they went to their later period. In fact, as a live band, they were amazing. I wish they had continued. Interesting collection that have everything from solo records and songs that some of the members were on. I'm not going to get into the early years. The Jet Set was an early band with Jim McGuinn and the Hillsmen with Chris Hillman. Obviously, Jim McGuinn, Chris Hillman and Gene Clark came out of the folk scene, singer-songwriter scene, folk scene. And then the whole Beatle thing started, and they saw George Harrison with a 12-string, and of course, Roger McGuinn, Jim McGuinn picked up the Rickenbacker, and the rest is history. The jingle jangle of Mr. Tambourine Man, Turn, 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 and Columbia Records. So I'm going to dive right in now. No order, and there are omissions, but I think one of my all-time favorite solo albums is If I Can Only Remember My Name by David Crosby. I do not have Cros and his later albums. I hear they're quite good. And frankly, I've never heard them, and I probably should jump in on them. But I think this has been reissued, just celebrated its 50th anniversary. This is a fantastic Americana, before they even called it Americana, folk rock album with guests from Neil Young to, this is recorded in San Francisco, I think at Wally Heider's. And it has members of the Jefferson Airplane, members of the Dead, and it's such a beautiful record. There is a 5.1 CD DVD version that came out over a decade ago, and it's just fantastic. So If I Can Only Remember My Name, David Crosby, amongst my all-time favorite albums. Now, Crosby and Nash went on to do a series of records for ABC Records. I think this is their most successful and my favorite, Wind on the Water. I don't have the subsequent records of this, except when I worked for ABC, this came out. Terrible cover. This is a promo copy I got working for the label, and this was Crosby and Nash, the best of David Crosby and Graham Nash from the ABC years. But I just remember when this came out. It was a terrible cover then, terrible cover now, but this is really a fantastic record. Love this. Critical Mass, Wind on the Water, whole environmental take on Save the Whales, and beautiful harmonies. They're just, they could do no wrong. I mean, obviously they begat Crosby, Stills and Nash, which I'll show a couple of those albums just to keep it going, but fantastic record. Then an album by a band that was supposed to be a hit supergroup. Asylum Records was a Souther, Hillman, Furay band. It had David Souther, who a great songwriter, wrote with Jackson Browne, the Eagles, and beautiful singer, golden voice. Obviously Chris Hillman, who was the original bass player for the Byrds, and Richie Furay from Buffalo Springfield. This is a good album. It doesn't quite make it, and I got this right when it came out, and it's just something about it was slightly off. Something went wrong with this record. Interesting record, part of the whole story. So Souther, Hillman, Furay band, they never made a follow-up to this. Chris Hillman, one thing I don't have any Chris Hillman, the Desert Rose Band. He did a country rock band, made a number of albums, and for whatever reason, I don't have those records. This is a great record. This is Stephen Stills' Manassas. Fantastic record. One record is more rock and roll based. It's a double album. One is a little more country based with banjo, somewhat bluegrass. Great percussionists of Joe Layla, Al Perkins, Fuzzy Samuels on bass, Paul Harris. Great drummer Dallas Taylor, who would be Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Young Taylor, and of course Chris Hillman. So Chris Hillman was a member of this band, and this is a fantastic record. They did do a live record after that, and then poof, gone. So a lot of these bands really didn't last long. Now, sticking with Chris Hillman, his most recent album that I know of, Chris Hillman, Biding My Time. This is a beautiful recorded record. Great vocals, great sound. This was produced by Tom Petty, and it has members of Tom Petty's Heartbreakers on it, and it's a gorgeous country folk record. They do Bells of Rhythmney, a song the Byrds obviously covered early on, and Old John Robertson is also on here. And the sad part about this, I mean, it's a great record, fantastic record, and this came out literally around the time or just after Tom Petty died. He had finished this record. It might have been the last project he worked on. I don't know all the details there, but this Chris Hillman, Biding My Time, is a fantastic record, and it came out in 2017. To me, the Byrds were about the great harmonies and vocals, and I think that discussion I had with that commenter on that video saying how after the second, third album, the Byrds were no more, according to him, because the harmonies of Jim McGuinn, Gene Clark, and David Crosby are second to none. I mean, they were essentially, America's answer to the Beatles on larger scale. We had the Beau Brummels earlier out of San Francisco with Laugh Laugh and a couple of things. That was kind of the first group to gain traction in that similar style. And the name Beau Brummels was basically, really pushed to sound British a little bit. But the Byrds were the answer. That twangy guitar, that great sound, obviously early on, the Wrecking Crew backing some of them with Jim McGuinn's 12-string Rickenbacker. But that sound and those harmonies of those vocals were amazing. And of course, Gene Clark wrote more songs than anyone else, because remember, their first hits were Mr. Tambourine Man, Turn, 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 Turn was from the book of Ecclesiastes. And Pete Seeger wrote lyrics for it, and it became a pop hit, folk hit, pop hit, and of course the Dylan songs, all the Dylan songs the Byrds covered. But Gene Clark was the songwriter, so there was a little bit of animosity, which is really too bad, because he made a lot more money than the rest of the band because he was a songwriter. So you need to hold on to that publishing and start writing songs. But I like the Roger McGuinn solo records. It started with this one in 1973. But there was always something slightly off also with his records. Great songs on the album. Obviously, the Byrds and Roger McGuinn influenced, amongst others, Tom Petty for one, and did, he sounded like Roger McGuinn in his sound early on the early Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers albums. This has some great songs on it. My Linda, Dragon, Lost My Driving Wheel, which I believe is the Tom Rush song. Am I right on that one? Nope. D. Whiffen, but there was a great version of that by Tom Rush, and I just love. So I like this album, and I like his solo albums on Columbia, but they didn't quite make it, and he didn't get the chart success of any of the Byrds albums. And I kind of really wish the Byrds had stayed together, because I think they were pretty much on a high note the last few years with that great band, which I'll get to in a little bit in the solo record. So that was his debut solo record. Roger McGuinn, Peace on You. Again, some great songs. Doesn't quite make it on the whole, but there's some fantastic songs on here. Now, this is an interesting combination of people. What a beautiful cover. Cardiff Rose. I like this because there's some traditional English folk songs on here. The interesting thing, this was produced by Mick Ronson. Yeah, that Mick Ronson with David Bowie, which seemingly is an unusual combination, but somewhat a couple years after this, or maybe around this time, 76, this was the year. That's probably where they met. Again, probably you have more knowledge in that. On the Bob Dylan Hurricane tour, the Roger McGuinn was on it, Mick Ronson was on it. So my guess is they kind of hooked up there. But this is a good record. This is probably my favorite of the solo records of this mid-70s period of Roger McGuinn. Jolly Roger's on here. It's got that kind of English, this is a great cover. It's got that traditional English sound, not throughout it totally, but a fantastic album. That was a Hard Rain tour. I was thinking of the Bob Dylan Hard Rain tour. Ronaldo and Claire, that circus. Now, this is an interesting artifact. Promo copy I got, white label promo. And this is Roger McGuinn and band. Trying to get a little more modern. This came out in 1975, so I guess those two were out of order. This should have been before that. But not a great record. Some interesting cuts on here. Roger McGuinn. Now, aside from the Byrds reunion album that came out, 73, 74 on Asylum, it didn't get a lot of love. It's grown on me over the years. Again, it opens with that great song, Circle, by Gene Clark. And I think there's some really good songs on it. They do an interesting version of Cowgirl in the Sand, the Neil Young song, on that reunion album. And this is the closest they got later to a reunion album, 1979. And this is McGuinn, Clark, and Hillman. And this actually got some airplay, has some good songs on it. Long, Long Time, Little Mama, Backstage Pass, Release Me Girl. McGuinn, Clark, and Hillman. I mean, there was always a lot of animosity between David Crosby and Roger McGuinn that it still goes on to this day. So there we go. I should show these two in terms of CDs. There's a series of CDs that came out in the 90s, I believe. And they were like, you ordered directly from McGuinn's website. And it's Roger McGuinn's Folk Den series. Folk Den Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. And the title is exactly what they are. Traditional folk songs, hymn alone, beautiful, beautiful CDs. This is a limited edition. And what's interesting about this, he opens up with a version of If I Needed Someone by George Harrison. And George Harrison always called out Roger McGuinn. I believe he sent that song to Roger saying, you know, this is basically me doing me doing a Byrds song, If I Needed Someone. Great song by George Harrison, and it's great to see McGuinn cover it on this. This was recorded in 2004. This came out. Nice selection. And then this is Treasures from the Folk Den, newly recorded folk standards of former Byrd leader and Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Roger McGuinn with some special guests. Judy Collins on here, Josh White Jr.'s on here, Odetta, Pete Seeger, Gene Ritchie, Judy Collins, Pete Seeger, and Josh White Jr., Joan Baez. So if you're a folkie, this is a great series for you. Any of these Roger McGuinn series. So he gets back to his roots, basically things he started out. The Byrds, after all, were a folk group, rocked up. Add some drums, electric guitar, and there you go. I'm a huge Gene Clark fan. I did see him in the mid-'70s twice, literally, I think 2 or 3 days in a row in a club in Berkeley, California, and in Santa Rosa, California, Cotati, I believe, just north of San Francisco. Gene Clark, the White Light demos. A lot of these have been reissued a lot. He is one of those artists that's become sort of gotten cult status over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And the folk rock, he tried a lot of things. He left the Byrds early on. Columbia signed him, and we'll get into that a little bit here. So this is an interesting record. This is when he left Columbia. Columbia had him do one record that really bombed, and it's Gene Clark with the Gosden Brothers, a very folky, more folky-based country album, folk-based, not the rock and roll he was doing. I believe this came out the same year as Younger Than Yesterday, so how can you compete with that? Not that it should be a competition, but the whole Byrds sound, this really wasn't happening. The whole singer-songwriter thing wouldn't happen for about, 3 more years or so, 3-4 more years. So Gene Clark with the Gosden Brothers, beautiful record. Echoes, the opening track, was arranged and conducted by Leon Russell, who was a member early on also of the Wrecking Crew. He signs to A&M Records, and he does a solo album, Gene Clark. This is a beautiful record. I love this record. The Virgin, White Light, Spanish Guitar. Spanish Guitar is one of those songs that everybody I know who loves Gene Clark calls that song out. It's just a really lovely song. There's several reissues of albums, of demos, and versions of that song on several recordings. But this I know has been reissued several times. I think Intervention Records, actually, the archival record from up here, Washington State, has done some, including some Burrito Brothers, which I'll show a little later. Backstreet Mirror, again, this is an EP of the Chip Douglas tapes from 1968. Again, so many Gene Clark records have been coming out the last few years, partly Record Store Day and beyond. Gene Clark early LA sessions, this came out in the 70s, 1972. That there was a resurgence then when the Byrds were kind of tailing off from their last album as the Byrds, and then subsequently, I guess 73, they did their reunion record. Gene Clark was trying to get some momentum. He was getting signed, and You know, a lot of tapes were being dug up, and the 70s was a big time for reissuing or issuing records by artists that are sort of bubbling under. Now this is a record I bought when I worked in the 70s in a record store. This is Roadmaster. This is a record that should have come out everywhere. It only came out originally in the Netherlands, and there's some great songs on here. Basically, it's the Byrds from the reunion period, some work he did at that time, Gene Clark, and it's got the Full Circle song, which opened up the reunion album as well. She's a Kind of a Girl, Roadmaster. Fantastic record. I know this has been reissued the last decade. I'm not sure what label, but this is my original A&M. Again, only originally in the Netherlands, didn't come out in America in the 70s. And then there's this album, 1974, Gene Clark and No Other. I saw him, I think I saw him in 75, 76 is when I saw him. This was the big comeback record that wasn't the big comeback record. He signs to Asylum Records, David Geffen's label, and they spent a shitload of money on this record. He's glammed up, which is so bizarre when this came out. This has become a cult classic, and it's a fantastic record. It's got a great band. It's got really interesting arrangements. It's less country. In fact, it's not really country at all. It's rock and roll, but not. It's an interesting Silver Raven. It's moody, No Other, Life's Greatest Fool. It's got Lee Sklar on bass, Butch Trucks on drums, Russ Kunkel, Joe Layla, Richard Green, Chris Hillman is on here also, Danny Cooch, Jesse Ed Davis. I mean, just a great collection of artists, but this went way over budget in terms of the artwork, the photography, the recording. And in the last couple years, this major box, 4AD Records, put out No Other, this Gene Clark collection. And this has been one of my favorite albums since it came out. And again, it's gotten cult status since the reissue record came here. It's got the Making of a Masterpiece. It's got Silver File version 3, a flexi disc. And this book really talks about the entire session, recording. I mean, look at that. Look at that photo with his eye shadow and makeup. Talks about the songwriting in the studio, just everything that went on to make this fabulous record. I mean, again, over-the-top archive for some people, yet another flexi disc. 4AD is a great label that has all the Dream Pop records and the Pixies, and just an amazing label that they would do something like this. CDs and sessions, Blu-ray, fantastic set. So, I mean, Gene Clark to me is probably was one of the most prolific. I mean, all the Byrds were prolific. We'll get on with that. So I don't want to. It's easy you become a little bit of an art martyr in a way once you're dead, and it's hard for David Crosby or Jim McGuinn to compete with Gene Clark and Graham Parsons. This is another record on A&M Records, and this was a good one. Two Sides to Every Story, Gene Clark. And again, we're out of order here, but these are two important records. When he was on A&M, he made these two records with Dillard and Clark. Doug Dillard from the Dillards, the sort of the bluegrass country outfit, and two fantastic records. On here, he ends up with Don't Let Me Down, the Beatles song, the John Lennon song. But these are fantastic records, and I believe these have been reissued too. And if you like country rock with a little more rock in it, but not like hard rock, these are fantastic records, Gene Clark. And just recently, if you want a good overview, this just came out. And this is a 3-record set. And this came out on Music on Vinyl, 3-record set, Gene Clark collected. And it's got several songs from no other. It's got I Feel a Whole Lot Better. It opens up with the Byrds version of that. It's got for Spanish guitar from his solo records. It's got some Dillard and Clark cuts, and it's got some cuts he did on an album that I don't have with Carla Olson. I don't have the album of Carla Olson that he did, Gene Clark. So fantastic collection right here. Okay, now the second half of the Byrds. What I consider the second half kind of is that middle period, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Obviously early on, let me before that just show these for the sake of it. I don't need to say anything about Crosby, Stills and Nash. David Crosby obviously hooked up with Graham Nash and Stephen Stills, and this became the superstar group of all superstar groups. So the Byrds, the Byrd parts really begat all this amazing music. After Sweetheart of the Rodeo, one of the artists that, to this day gets a lot of play for obvious reasons, and that's Graham Parsons. He really pushed that album to be what it was. It was an album, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, had Louvin Brothers and more pure country music, and it bombed. People didn't get it. It was the year 1968. At the same year, the Beau Brummels put out Bradley's Barn, which was a country rock masterpiece in my mind that also bombed. They came out, around a few months apart from each other. Graham Parsons was in this band, International Submarine Band. This thing didn't do anything either. This was Lee Hazelwood's label, and this is an interesting country rock affair, trying to do like psychedelic cowboy, space cowboy a little bit. But a good record. It's been reissued again many times. But the thing that became a masterpiece, the record that did become a masterpiece, again, after the fact, is Flying Burrito Brothers, this one. This is their debut, and fantastic record. This has Chris Hillman from the original Byrds. It has Graham Parsons. It has Chris Etheridge and Sneaky Pete pedal steel guitar. Fantastic record. If you can find it now, the Intervention reissue is a great audiophile version of this record. Love this record. I love the nudie suits they're wearing, shot in the desert in California. The follow-up is Burrito Deluxe. Almost as good. Again, there's also an Intervention version of that record. I mean, country rock, in a way, a little too soon for country rock for some people, Poco was around, and then we all know the Eagles and the rest of the story. Now, I am including this because Chris Hillman was still in the band. Graham Parsons left. I saw Flying Burrito Brothers once, and I really don't remember the concert very well because it was at Altamont. And the infamous concert in California at the Rolling Stones and Jefferson Airplane and Santana and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Flying Burrito Brothers. The Grateful Dead were on the bill, but they decided not to play, and we all know the shit show of Altamont. And Graham Parsons gets in the plane with the Stones and leaves and basically quits the band. This is their follow-up. This is actually a good record too. Rick Roberts joins the band. Bernie Leadon, who would obviously go on to form the Eagles soon after that, would play this fantastic record. There is Flying Burrito Brothers, the last of the burritos. Last of the Red Hot Burritos, excuse me. And at this point, Chris Hillman's still here, Rick Roberts, Michael Clark is on drums, the original drummer for the Byrds. And then really, I'm just showing this to kind of keep the act together. This is live in Amsterdam. Double record set, import only. And it has no members of the Byrds. So it's a whole different outfit using the name, but I thought I just would throw it in there for visualization and context. And of course, if you can't find those, you can find this great A&M comp, Close Up, Honky Tonk, the Flying Brothers, 1968 to 1972, a twofer that has a nice overview of their output, the Flying Burrito Brothers. Now, we're talking about Graham Parsons. I'll just go through his catalog that I have pretty quickly. There's been so many, you know, he's become sort of the grievous angel of country rock. Fallen Angels, live 1973, around the time of his solo career and his death, untimely death. Graham Parsons, alternate takes from Grievous Angel and GP. These are alternate takes, somewhat demos, but from those great two reprise records with Emmylou Harris. Again, early on, this is the early years when with the Shilohs, Graham Parsons and the Shilohs, more of a folk band, folk country band, acoustic based. What I would consider the two masterpieces. GP, the first solo album with Emmylou Harris. He introduced me and everyone else to Emmylou Harris. Wonderful record, and to me, the ultimate masterpiece came out after he died, and that's Grievous Angel. And it has James Burton on his great pink paisley guitar, Emmylou Harris, fantastic record, beautiful songwriting, picks up a song or two. He played with the Byrds, Hickory Wind, fantastic. So that's my Graham Parsons collection. One little extra sort of, let's make some money and sell it. The Flying Burrito Brothers, Graham Parsons with the Flying Burrito Brothers, another reissue because of the interest in his career, posthumous career, with some liner notes by Emmylou Harris, Graham Parsons. The Byrds Beyond were an interesting group, the second half of the Byrds, and they had at that point someone who I would consider the greatest guitar player the Byrds ever had, and that was Clarence White. Clarence White was part of the Kentucky Colonels bluegrass group. This is an import. Actually, this is Rounder Records. This is the original Appalachian Swing. If you can find a copy of Appalachian Swing, this is the import copy I was thinking of. Same record, Kentucky Colonels. And if you want to look and Google Kentucky Colonels, Andy Griffith Show, you'll see them playing in the jail on an episode of the Andy Griffith Show with a young Clarence White, one of the most fantastic guitar players. When he was in the Byrds with Gene Parsons on drums, this is the only solo album I have of Gene Parsons. This is actually a good record, Kindling. Sounds great, country rock, really well done. This is from 1973. He invented the B-bender, which is an apparatus that goes on the Telecaster for Clarence White. And they kind of worked on it together, but he actually built it, the original B-bender. Marty Stewart, the guitarist and singer, bought that guitar with the original B-bender from Clarence White's wife. So I just think these records are fantastic. To me, if you listen to the Byrds Lives album, Live Untitled, and hear the jammy guitar of Clarence White and Clarence White's playing on Chestnut Mare on that same album, the studio version, that acoustic guitar, it's unbelievable. What a great guitarist. So this is my collection. A lot of stuff, a lot of records, somewhat incomplete maybe compared to what's out there, but great music. Crosses over with folk, country, rock and roll, and the Byrds begat all this great solo work, and it's still coming out in some ways again. So thanks for watching again. Mazzy loves you, and we'll see you next time. Pre-flight, post-flight, we're about to land.